For that, Labour's house building bonanza could end up having unforeseen consequences. So Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has repeatedly promised his government will be builders, not blockers. The party campaigned on a pledge to build 1.5 million homes in 5 years, mostly on green belt land, and people think that that's the only issue. In fact, a lot of people think that's a positive thing. But let's look into the detail here. Angela Rayner has also boldly pledged that every borough in the UK will be required to take their, quotes, fair share of asylum seekers, before adding that they would all be eligible for places in the 1.5 million new social houses and homes that Labour plans to build right across the country. Alongside the amnesty for the 90,000 or so migrants earmarked for the Rwanda flights, the Tories say that this could mean 1,300 new asylum seekers being housed in every local authority if the number of illegal migrants entering the UK continues at the same level for the next 5 years. I wanted more detail on this. I think this is an issue, a topic that frankly has not been picked up enough yet. I'm joined by housing expert, property expert, Russell Quirk. Russell, look, thank you very much. I was hoping that you might really be able to start by just letting us know what kind of percentage of new housing developments have to be allocated as affordable or social housing. What are the rules here?
So, generally speaking, every development over 10 housing units is required that 35% of all of those units are in some way social housing. Now, that could be social rent, which is what we used to call council housing, which obviously doesn't exist anymore. That could be affordable, as in below market value, or it could be shared ownership. So the rough rule of thumb is that 35% of everything that's built on a substantive development has to be for social housing. The problem with that, of course, is if the builders, the top 10, the likes of Persimmon, Bovis, Taylor Wimpey and so on, if they decide that they want to throttle back on their housing output, social housing suffers as a consequence.
So conceivably, if there is then a development of, say, 100 homes somewhere, how many kind of social houses could we see on that particular site?
There would be 35 units, and the local council will then decide what the mix is between shared ownership, but most of them will be social rent. So it will be people that are on the waiting list that go into those homes.
And that's my next question. So as it currently stands, under the rules of people who get into social housing, how is that decided, really? Because we have supposedly around 90,000 people being added to this backlog, i.e.
by way of the amnesty that Keir Starmer is about to undertake. The general rule, again, is that local authorities do it based on a points system, which is based on need. The Conservatives actually last year tried to introduce a kind of British first approach. That didn't happen. So right now, most local authorities will allocate on need. Now, the problem with that is that need is predicated around such things as overcrowding, how many children you've got, if you're in distress, obviously if you're in a home where there's violence and so on. But there is nothing that actually puts someone that's British, that's been on the waiting list for, let's say, 10 years, in front of someone that rocks up here from Somalia, for instance, and says, hey, I've got 17 kids, I need a council house. The need, technically, will be that person that wasn't born here will probably and have got council housing, social housing, before those that have paid into the system here for years and years and years.
OK. And a concern would be, as well, as Labour is saying that they want to close the migrant hotels, that people, therefore, who... and process people quicker, that people would, therefore, be at risk of eviction quicker, could, therefore, be higher up that housing need waiting list and see themselves in social housing. So what could local residents maybe actually do to stop this? Because at the moment, all of the conversation about Labour's planning and Labour's house building seems to be centred around, well, I might not want it built on my green belt, as opposed to, whether or not people actually might want to have a housing development with an attachment of asylum seekers onto that.
I mean, the reality is, Patrick, there's nothing the local populace can do. So there's a misconception that local residents can write to their MP, their council, their councillors to try and block local developments. That's actually not a thing. The planning process is that any planning development that goes through the consent process is agreed or not based on merit. Let me just tell you very, very quickly some of the stats. So 40% of social housing in London is now lived in already, so before what we're about to see under the current government, is already lived in by people that weren't born in Britain. 10% of all new social housing goes to people that were born overseas. That rate has doubled since 2010. So this is already a problem. But, and again, I know I'm here as a housing guy, but with a political hat on, what we're about to see is an absolute disaster in terms of the influx of people coming to this country as the floodgates open and amnesties are, provided, and we are nowhere near building enough homes, social or otherwise. Frankly, the 1.5 million homes that Angela Rayner has talked about over the next 5 years is a fantasy. They are not going to do it. I'll eat my socks if they do.
All right, look, Russell, thank you very, very much. Insightful stuff. I think it's fair to say that's a story that's going to become quite a lot bigger.
It should.
In the coming months and years. So thank you for kind of being first out the traps on that one. As Russell Quirk there, who is, of course, a property expert.